The Confederation of Planets. This confederation consists of approximately 53 civilizations and about 500 planetary consciousness complexes. According to the RA Collective, it contains both those from our own solar system who have evolved to dimensions higher than our third, but also consciousness complexes from other solar systems. The RA Collective themselves belong to the Confederation of Planets, and when they refer to that there are those from our solar system who have evolved to become members, they refer to themselves, because they claim to be originally from Venus, which was the planet on where they once upon a time evolved. I also get the feeling that the Greys, who are us in the future, may very well be members of this confederation. They too of course evolved here in our solar system, and one stipulation to become members of this confederation is that you must be a collective of beings, a so-called social memory complex or consciousness complex, single beings, or even beings of a whole planet. Who have evolved can't be members, unless they have merged into this complex hive community of which both RA and the Greys can consider themselves being part of. RA says that it is a true confederation in that its members are not alike but allied in service according to the law of one. They are available through our thoughts. This means that you can call upon them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that all of them are benevolent. You need to know whom you are calling for, to be in service in accordance with the law of one can potentially mean both negatively and positively. It looks like the Council of Thuban, followed by the Council of 24 and 12 are the top of the pyramid in this universe, and nothing can bypass them without them knowing about it. Then, beneath the Council of 12, the councils and federations start to branch out in different directions, depending on the purpose with them. Still, they all have to answer to the three councils here above, the Council of Zendar and the Rings of Saturn. This council is also called the Council of Zendar, or the Council of Saturn, and is commonly mentioned in the RA material. This is the council that is allegedly in charge of our solar system. Before anyone can land on any of our planets and on Earth in particular, they need to have the permission to do so by this local council. They are, in other words, the ones who can decide who is allowed to enter 3D on Earth. And when RA landed here a few times in the past, they first went through the Council of Saturn, who gave them permission, opened the quarantine, and let the RA star beings through. Some members of the council are also situated in the center of our planet, as guardians of Mother Earth. When Don Elkins asks the RA Collective where this Council of Zendar is located, they answer him that they are in the 8th dimension of the planet Saturn, which we with our 3D understanding view as the rings of Saturn. This makes sense, as the 8th dimension is the highest dimension in this physical universe. Once you enter the 9th dimension, which you can't without permission, you are in the void. Also, when asked why the Orion group, the Sirian Alliance, whom the RA Collective say are of the 4th and 5th density negative on occasion, have been seen flying through the quarantine, and if they have been granted permission, RA replies that sometimes there's a hole in the quarantine, and the Orion group can manage to break through that way, and sometimes they are allowed permission to create a balance between positive and negative here on Earth. This is very interesting, to say the least, because here is evidence that there is an 8th density council, which guarantees that no one in the solar system, on any evolving planet, enters the Ka without their permission, but it also works the other way around. Of course, if beings from the Ka, such as members of the Thuban Council, want to come into our reality, they will be given the go-ahead by Zendar. But even more interesting than that, in our case, is that they let through ships and hollowed out asteroids from the Sirian Alliance. I have a hard time believing that the Sirian overlords can fool the council just because they hide inside of asteroids. So apparently it's okay with the council that we have the situation we have on the planet today. Either there are a lot of holes in the quarantine, or does the Council of Saturn think that we have a balance on the planet right now? Hard to believe. Figure 2. Ninerda. Another relevant question would be if Xandar has something to do with the harvest, and if that is the reason why they let so many hollowed out asteroids and Sirians in spirit onto the planet right now. Well, that is the only thing that makes sense. Think about it for a moment. The Council of Saturn sits in constant session in the rings of Saturn, in the 8th dimension. First of all, where does the name Saturn come from? Well, in the Mesopotamian pantheon, Saturn was also the name for Ninurta, son of Enlil. And Ninurta is a representative of the 4th archetype, which is the archetype directly associated with Earth and our mythology. His mentor, interestingly enough, was Enki, who gave him several powerful mess. I am sure there are more reasons why Saturn was named after Ninurta, but one of them could very well be because Ninurta is in charge of the opening of the vortex on our side of the solar system, which perhaps will open or has opened in the vicinity of the planet Saturn. Here may also be the vortex which opens into the void, where the 4% universe hologram, in regard to humanity, is maintained. After all, this is close to what researcher Davidic has concluded in Remember Who You Are.
The god El, the Hebrew god El, was their god of Saturn. So El and Elohim are demiurge and archons, I would suggest. So we have archangels, Michael, Gabriel, Uriel, Raphael, another name for Jesus, Emmanuel. We have the Gospels, Chapel, Elders, elevated to the priesthood, elections where pawns are elected to serve the elite. We have Isis, Ra, El, all names relating to Saturn. Saturn, Kronos, Satan, Black Sun, Dark Lord, they're all the same thing, the expression of this force. And here you have Moloch, who they worship at Bohemian Grove, and he is a god of Saturn, this recurring theme. They also represent Moloch as a bull, as I said earlier, and so you have that as the symbol of Wall Street. And the golden calf in the Bible is Moloch, Saturn. The Greeks talked about Saturn used to eat his own children. And here's the colors of Satanism and the colors of Saturn, black and red, same as the royal protocol. The robes of the judge, the robes of the clergy, the square hats of universities, the hammer that the judge uses, it's all Saturn symbolism. You see Saturn profusely used in symbolism of the corporate world. And this Earth, Wind and Fire, they got the bloody set. There's the eye, there's the six-pointed star, there's the step pyramid, there's the winged disc, and there's bloody Saturn. And then, therefore, you look at religions and secret societies and Satanism, they're worshipping Saturn. Then you look astrologically, in other words, energetically. Banking is astrologically ruled by Saturn. Politics and institutions of state at all levels, astrologically ruled by Saturn. Corporations, astrologically ruled by Saturn. Law and court system, astrologically ruled by Saturn. Science, astrologically ruled by Saturn. Saturn worship, Satan worship.
He says that Saturn probably plays a main role in how the holographic universe is created. He theorizes that the hologram is projected from Saturn via the moon and further down to Earth. Anyway, on the other side of Saturn, figuratively speaking, is the 9th dimension, which the Council of Xandar is protecting, as well as the entry into our solar system. I wonder if all solar systems have a council like this, or if it is because Earth is special. Figure 3, the rings of Saturn. I get this very feeling that the 2nd and 4th orders of archetypes are going to be the main players here for a while, interplaying with each other, the 4th of course being the gods of old Mesopotamia, and the 2nd being the dragons of the void, the Council of Thuban. Now, keep in mind that these archetypes have been created by us, perhaps with some help from the Sirians themselves, and when looked upon from the viewpoints of the void, the 2nd and 4th archetype orders may very well be the same, or on the same level, both being of the 12th dimension. The Cassiopeans also mention the Council of Xandar in a few places. The Xandar Council is a 6th level density council which spans both physical and ethereal realms and which oversees dramatic development points at various civilizational sectors in lower density levels. Here they mention the 6th density instead of the 8th dimension in the RA material, but it all depends on which dimension density system we use. In another session. From July 23, 1994, The Cassiopeians say that the Zendar Council is a two-cycle exchanger's mission, which may sound cryptic to begin with, but if we think about it, we have just completed one cycle and started a new, and what is the mission in between? To complete the harvest. It sounds to me that this council has as one of its missions to see to that the harvest is completed, whatever it takes, and letting the Syrian alliance pass through their filter is nothing they see as unusual. It's a part of their mission. Interestingly enough, the Cassiopeians in the same session refer to Jesus as a member of this Council of Saturn. This is not as unbelievable as it sounds, as we will see when we move on. Just keep this in mind. We know Jesus from the Bible as the Son of God, but we know him as the son of the goddess, right? And who is that? Enki. So, if Jesus equals Enki, we also have whom I refer to as Space Jesus, who is extremely relevant in channeled material and in New Age philosophy. The Bible talks about the second coming of Jesus, but so does New Age. Many are those who say they channel Jesus, or the federations Jesus is said to belong to. People shake their heads and think this is nonsense, but looked at from the right angle, it's really not if we know who Jesus is, Enki, son of the goddess. In another session from May 31, 1995, the Cassiopeians compare the members on the Zendar Council with angels wearing wings, and that this is where our concept of angels come from, the winged sun disk, Jesus and his angels. There is more evidence showing who the council is. Allowing permission. Here is a direct quote from RA telling us that they are granting permission for entities to pass the quarantine in spirit form. Secondly, there is permission granted, not to break quarantine by dwelling among you, but to appear in thought form capacity for those who have eyes to see. The more I look into this whole concept with channeled sources and federations, I see a connection between it all, which has to do with the concepts of the 4% and the 96% universes. There is so incredibly much that we haven't been told but have the right to know. Still, the evidence is there if we are willing to dig deep enough. The Council of Nine. This is a big one, because this council has had such an influence here on Earth, at least over the last decades. It has long seemed to me that this council has been the one which has as its responsibility to interact directly with us here in 3D, in order to get the process going, leading up to the point of the harvest. Figure 4, Henry Andrija Puharich. I posted an article about the Nine on my Illuminati news website back in 2005, although that article was quite biased, having a Christian slant. It had a lot of valuable information in there and was well researched. In December 1952, Andrija Puharich, whom at that time was the head of the Round Table Foundation, and strongly into the paranormal, invited an East Indian psychic named Dr. D.G. Vinod, who began to channel the Council of Nine. An inner circle of people came regularly to listen to Dr. Vinod channeling these 9 deities. Yes, they claim to be the Ennead, the 9 most prominent gods in ancient Egypt, the Orion group. Interestingly enough, 3 years later, Puharich met with some members of the UFO movement in Mexico, who also claimed to be channeling the 9, and their transcripts referred to the sessions transmitted to Puharich's group. So, obviously, there was more than one group of people channeling the 9. Figure 5, Uri Geller bending metals with his mind. The continuous story goes that Puharich, who himself was a psychic, eventually got in contact with a young Israeli psychic named Uri Geller. The reader probably knows about him. He was famous in the 70s for bending spoons on international TV. He also managed to bend spoons in people's homes while they were watching the program. Puharich was the person discovering Geller, and from that comes a very interesting story. Uri Geller, while set in trance, unpredictably started channeling something called Spectra, which was supposedly a conscious supercomputer aboard a spaceship. Puharich suggested that this might have something to do with the 9, and Spectra confirmed this, and said they had programmed Uri Geller since he was a child to be a super psychic. They also told Puharich that his life mission was to use Geller's talents to promote a mass landing of spaceships, which was supposed to be controlled by the Nine. In '73, Geller left his mission and didn't want to have anything to do with the Nine again, so Puharich found another psychic, Phyllis Schlemmer. She became the channeler of Tom, who was one of the Nine. I find this extremely interesting, especially as I suggested earlier that some of the channeled material could be done on a super computer, which could answer most of the questions people have. It sure seems like that may be case. I hadn't read the Illuminati news article again since the year I posted it, and just reviewed it now after I stated that some channeling seems to have been made from computers. Some may suggest that the supercomputer is set up by the military-industrial complex, but it's doubtful. Hypothetically, they could have received the technology to do so from ETS, but this story seems to be much bigger than that, which we will notice when we move on. But before we do, there is another short, but interesting story to tell about Bashar, the famous channel by Daryl Enka. In one session the following happened. This part jumped out for me. A guy asked 3 questions, first about chemtrails, second about H1N1, third about compulsory vaccines. To each question Bashar answered, that data is no longer available from this terminal. He said that he answered this way because all of these are negatively oriented, fear-inducing belief systems. We cannot extend frequencies and energies in those domains. Is this related to the weird ending of a previous session, where we heard this terminal has no more data? Well, to me it sounds like a lame excuse. Bashar has always answered whatever questions the audience has, without fail, and now, all of a sudden, they refuse to answer negative questions. And why do they call themselves this terminal? The term terminal is normally related to computers. Anyway, let's continue the story about the Nine. To make a long story short, the small project which started with Puharich and his group in 1952 soon grew to enormous proportions. A lot of very famous people around the world started attending the Nine sessions, such multi-billionaires as the Bronfmans, Canadian, international businessmen, members of the global elite, the Illuminati, European nobility, scientists from Stanford Research Institute, and a personal friend of the sitting president, Gerald Ford. Other members were the famous author, Lyle Watson, the influential counterculture guru, Ira Einhorn, and last, but not the least, Gene Roddenberry. Creator of Star Trek, Figure 6, Gene Roddenberry, father of Star Trek. Roddenberry deserves his own paragraph here. He was a member of the Nine Group in 1974 to 75, and even produced a screenplay for a movie about the Nine. It is also suggested that Roddenberry was deeply inspired by the information he'd received in the Nine sessions when he wrote the early Star Trek movies, The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, which was quite a giveaway. One of the characters in Deep Space Nine was Vinod, by the way, and we know that Dr. Vinod was the first known channeler of the Nine. Another major key figure in the Nine Group was J.J. Hurtak, Dr. James J. Hurtak, who was appointed second in command by the Nine. After Puharich, Dr. Hurtak also individually channeled the Nine in 73 and forward, all which ended up in his famous book, The Keys of Enoch, which is laid out in chapters and verses, in 2 columns, just like the Bible. Here is a quote from the introduction to the Keys of Enoch, and I was taken from this region of the stars into the midway station of Arcturus, the major programming center of the Galactic Council serving the Father on this side of our galaxy, which is under the direction of the Council of Nine, the governing body of our local universe. The famous people involved in this channel group never ends. Richard Hoagland, known NASA avant-garde researcher, is also under their influence. David Myers and David Percy were directors of operations for Hoagland's Mars mission. In fact, Hoagland's interpretations of the monuments on Mars comes directly from the 9 sessions. Another author whom some readers may know of is Peter Farley, who wrote a series of books, where the most well-known is Where Were You Before the Tree of Life. He, too, is heavily influenced by the 9, and even states that in the book, there is a lot to say about the 9, which goes far beyond the scope of what I've just told you, and I will move on and make that connection in a second, but before that I want to mention a little bit more about Andrija Puharich. He was also an army doctor in the 1950s, and deeply involved in CIA's MK-Ultra mind control program. He worked together with the notorious Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who experimented with putting voices in the head of involuntary guinea pigs. The following is a direct quote from the article I posted back in 2005. These techniques included the use of drugs, hypnosis, and beaming radio signals directly into the subject's brain, and, significantly, he was engaged in this work at exactly the same time that the 9 made their first appearance at the Round Table Foundation. The foundation itself is now known to have been largely funded by the Pentagon as a front for its medical and parapsychological research. Puharich was still working for the CIA in the early 1970s, when he brought Uri Geller out of Israel. Puharich's use of hypnosis is particularly interesting in the 9 circle, in the case of Uri Geller and Bobby Horn. He first hypnotized them and then suggested that they were in touch with the 9, and lo, they were. Ira Einhorn, a close associate of Puharich's during the 1970s, confirmed to us that he believed that Puharich was humanly directing the 9 communications. This is rather disturbing information, isn't it? Well, I wanted to bring all this up, because a few papers ago, I mentioned that some of the channeling is done by the mic, and that we must learn to distinguish between that and the real thing. Or could all channeling be done by the CIA and the mic? After the above revelations, it's easy to believe that, but that is not the case. Channeling has been practiced long before the 1950s, even in ancient times there were psychics who could contact beings not from here. However, it is possible that more channeling in present time than we may think is transmitted by humans. The technology is obviously there. It has been developing pretty rapidly since the 50s, and even the 70s, of course. For those who want to read more about Puharich and Uri Geller in reference to the 9, here are 2 interesting reports. Uri Geller, the 9 and the Council of 9, a perspective on briefings from deep space. It seems like Puharich, by the end of his life, was very scared of what he had found out, and it was apparently not only CIA mind control. He was desperately looking for someone who could channel the 9 again. What was he so afraid of? Now, let's move over to the RA material, which also talks about the 9, or the Council of 9. However, the RA sessions were later in time than Puharich's group. So does the RA material mention him at all? Well, fortunately, Don Elkins asked quite a few questions about Puharich and his group, and I want to quote a few of these conversations. I will post them in a row here underneath and we'll discuss them afterwards. Note that Andrija Puharich used an alias as well, and went by Henry Puharich. Questioner, is the Council of 9 the same 9 that was mentioned in this book? Questioner gestures to Uri. RA, I am RA. The Council of 9 has been retained in semi-undistorted form by 2 main sources, that known in your naming as Mark and that known in your naming as Henry. In one case, the channel became the scribe, in the other, the channel was not the scribe. However, without the aid of the scribe, the energy would not have come to the channel. Questioner, the names that you spoke of, were they Mark Probert and Henry Puharich? RA, I am RA, this is correct. Questioner, Andrija Puharich will be visiting later this month. Can he read the unpublished healing material? RA, I am RA, the entity of whom you speak has a knowledge of this material in its conscious memory in somewhat altered form. Therefore, it is harmless to allow this entity to become acquainted with this material. However, we request the mind-body-spirit complex, Penre, be sufficiently prepared by means of meditation, contemplation, or prayer before entering these workings. At present, as we have said before, this mind-body-spirit complex is not of proper vibrational distortion. Questioner, was the reason that the nine transmitted this principle in this form was the reason for this the first distortion? I am Ra. This is incorrect. Questioner, can you tell me why they gave the principle in such a veiled form then? I am Ra. The scribe is most interested in puzzles and equations. Questioner, I am sure that we are getting into a problem area with the first distortion here with a difficulty with a bit of transient material, but I have questions from a couple of people that I would like to ask. The first one especially is of no lasting value. Andrija Puharic asks about the coming physical changes, specifically this summer. Is there anything that we could relate to him about that? I am Ra. We may confirm the good intention of the source of this entity's puzzles and suggest that it is a grand choice that each may make to, by desire, collect the details of the day or, by desire, to seek the keys to unknowing. Don Elkins, in the third quote, mentions the first distortion, which for the reader's knowledge is the law of free will. Apparently, Elkins was visited by Puharic in the early 1980s because he thought that Puharic could benefit from the information given by the Ra collective. It seems quite obvious that Elkins didn't know about Puharic's CIA connection. When asked questions about Puharic and the Nine, Ra replies accordingly to how the question is asked, which their norm was, and this is why the truth about Puharic is not clearly revealed. Ra, however, indicates that he is not of proper vibrational distortion to receive some Ra material. This means in Ra language that Puharic is not vibrating on a very high frequency, i.e., he is not honest in this case. If Elkins would have known more, Ra would have told him the truth about Puharic. However, it seems like at least some of the channeling of the Nine by Puharic's group was authentic, but distorted due to the scribes' channelers' interest in puzzles and equations. Anyway, it's time to leave Puharic and his group and move on. The Council of Nine is mentioned by a number of channeled sources, where the Ra collective and the Elohim are two of them. Ra refers to them as a part of the Council of Saturn, being responsible for the planetary development in conjunction with its intelligent species. In number, the council that sits in constant session, though varying in its members by means of balancing, which takes place, what you would call irregularly, is 9, that is the session council. To back up this council, there are 24 entities which offer their services as requested. These entities faithfully watch and have been called the Guardians. The council operates by means of what you would call telepathic contact with the oneness or unity of the Nine, the distortions blending harmoniously so that the law of one prevails with ease. When a need for thought is present, the council retains the distortion complex of this need, balancing it as described, and then recommends what it considers as appropriate action. This includes 1. The duty of admitting social memory complexes to the Confederation. 2. Offering aid to those who are unsure how to aid the social memory complex, requesting aid in a way consonant with both the call, the law, and the number of those calling, that is to say, sometimes the resistance of the call. 3. Internal questions in the council are determined. These are the prominent duties of the council. They are, if in any doubt, able to contact the 24 who then offer consensus judgment thinking to the council. The council then may reconsider any question. So, in other words, the Council of Saturn, which is the Grand Council of our solar system, works in liaison with the Council of 24, 12, and 9, in descending order, where each council has its own duty. The rank of the council seems here a little vague, when RA is saying that the 24 are a backup council. I pledge to the reader to keep this in mind when considering the hierarchy, as it may, or may not change the order. However, according to the Theban Council, the 24 and the 12 are above the Council of Saturn, while the Council of 9 is below in the hierarchy. This is also confirmed by Ra in the last paragraph above. The Council of 9, as well as the other councils mentioned above, are also members of the Confederation of Planets. The Ra collective is a social memory complex, and as such has been approved by the Council of Saturn to become members of the Confederation of Planets. Due to that they are members, the Council of Saturn approved their visiting Earth a few times in the past. However, to Ra's own admission, they failed each time in their interaction with mankind and had to leave. Lastly, but not to the least, we may wonder if there is a direct Sirian connection to the Council of 9, which may be immediately related to the fourth order of archetypes that we are used to hear about. The names that by now are so familiar, and indeed there is, right from the dragon's fiery mouth, in the Theban thread on the Birth of Gaia forum someone asks Abraxas if there is a Sirian connection to the Council of 9, and here is Abraxas' reply. The Sirius connection is appropriate as Sirius A is the brightest and closest star to Earth in the ET agendas Namo of the Dogons and the dog star Sirius Asta Isis connections and so on. As we are getting closer to being able to map the 4% universe, we need the hierarchy to see how it is set up. Once we know that, the rest is just details, more or less. When Lucifer and his angels rebelled, they did not rebel in the 4% universe. There was no such at that time. There was only one big 100% universe. The perception of a much smaller universe was set up later by Enki Lucifer and his crew to counteract Mother Goddess' beautiful creation in progress. Note also that the Cassiopeans are talking about the Council of Saturn being angelic beings with wings, and how are Lucifer and his dark angels usually portrayed, with wings and with great beauty. This is far from the stocky, hairy dwarfs we talked about in level 2 as being the physical template for the Sirian overlords. See, that is the difference between a physical adaptation to a harsh environment and the beautiful light body. Anyway, this smaller universe is kept real with the help from holographic technology. No doubt, I believe Ick is on the right track when he is talking about holographic relay stations. His theory is that there is a holographic station on the Moon, which relays to a larger one on Saturn, which then relays to an even larger one on, well, in some other solar system, perhaps Sirius, or Alpha Draconis as far as Ick is concerned. But how about if these holographic relay stations exist in different frequencies, in different dimensions? Apparently, our 4% universe is made up of 8 dimensions and a vast number of densities. To keep each dimension stabilized in its illusion, there needs to be a hologram output in charge of each major frequency. This is another theory on how it may be set up. Then, of course, there is a main server put somewhere, most likely in the 9th dimension, overviewing the entire 8 dimensions of the holographic 4% universe. The 3D version of the hologram is the distortion of our own current 3D bodies. However, that will change once we break out and see through the lie. Our bodies are set up to do miracles. We can not only see the hologram for what it is, but like a person watching TV, we can turn it off as the distraction and distortion it is and begin to experience the 100% universe. Little do humans know how powerful our bodies are, and instead of nurturing and taking care of them, we abuse them and destroy them with GM food, drugs, cigarettes, and alcohol. Instead of expanding multidimensionally, we expand our bodies in 3D physicality and gain weight until we can't even move without wheelchairs. However, what I was going to say before I went off track was that just because Enki, Enlil, and the rest of the so-called Anunnaki gods are considered 4th order archetypes here on Earth, it doesn't mean they are stuck in the 4% universe. Enki, for example, I am sure is operating across the dimensions and outside the 4%. in the void where the so-called Dracos exist, they are again the same crew of rebels, and they are many in numbers. The book of Revelation indicates, although there are different interpretations, that Lucifer seduced a third of all angelic beings to rebel against the goddess, and if this is true, it's probably a lot, although like you two told me, we humans have since long surpassed them in quantity. My point is that only a few of these rebels have actually visited Earth, while the rest dwell in other dimensions, and many, like the Thubans, have been waiting in the void. We get a hint, however, when we hear the number 220 million, was that the amount of Sirians that rebelled together with Enki? It sure sounds like it. Well, we can now truly see that it's impossible to fight something like that, and if we didn't know better, we would give up right now. Fortunately, victory doesn't come from battle. No one in their right mind is going to try to fight this force which is apparently coming in with the wave. Instead, this is a great opportunity for us to show that we can separate ourselves out from that insanity, create our local, stable universes where these energies can't affect us, and prove that we can evolve without their help and their technology.